Welcome to Isora GRC from the Salty Cloud Help Desk. My name is Laura McWilliams. I'm a user enablement specialist at Salty Cloud, and I'll be taking you through this self-paced learning module about Isora GRC from Salty Cloud. We will discuss in this module what is Isora GRC, how is it used, who cares about Isora GRC. We'll go over some typical workflows, and then we'll also take a look at where you can find more information. You'll see a bunch of other topics listed here as well that we will be covering in other modules. So things like how to access Isora GRC, how to import organizational data and inventory, and then lots more information about actually doing assessments. These learning modules are mainly intended for anyone who will administer the Isora GRC product. So let's start off with the first question, and that is, what exactly is Isora GRC? Isora GRC is a risk assessment tool. You can use it to perform any kind of assessment in your IT environment, since you have full control over which questions will be used to generate assessments. In fact, you could use it to assess anything you choose. In practice, Isora GRC is often used to assess levels of information and security risk, and to achieve compliance with regulatory protocols such as those listed here. However, Isora GRC is not an inventory management tool. Although Isora GRC is capable of being used to track inventory, mainly used for the purposes of classifying the data stored on that inventory, it doesn't automatically discover assets. You can manually add inventory to Isora GRC or have a network-based scanning tool automate the process. Isora GRC is a standalone product, and there are no agents that run on any tracked assets. It also can't know the relationships between assets, people, and organizations. It only knows the information that you put into it. So who exactly is going to be concerned about Isora GRC? There are basically two groups of people who will typically access the product: administrators and end users. End users will typically only need to log into the tool occasionally to fill out surveys, possibly update information about inventory that they're responsible for, and also certain special type of users who are responsible for kicking off assessments or signing off on them will also have to do that as well. All end-user capabilities within Isora GRC are limited based on which organizational units they belong to and which roles they have. We'll discuss these roles in more detail in a different educational module. Based on their roles, end users will also see only limited information when they log into Isora GRC. They'll only see information that pertains to them. Administrators, on the other hand, should have super user access to Isora GRC, which gives them access to all capabilities and data within Isora GRC. Super users can manage information about organizational hierarchy, locations, and inventory, and they're responsible for building assessments. There needs to be at least one super user for each instance of Isora GRC, and when each instance is created, an initial super user gets created as well. There are several possible workflows for using Isora GRC, and which one you use will likely depend mainly on the size of your organization and how your hierarchy is structured. This first typical workflow represents a common division of labor between administrators and end users in a large organization. Administrators add all the information about users, organizational hierarchy, and inventory into Isora GRC. They may need to also add questions and related content as well. Salty Cloud can provide sets of default questions for doing well-known types of assessments, but you may need to add custom questions for your environment. Admins then build an assessment. Once the assessment has been published, end users can log in to fill out surveys. Each user will see only the portions of the assessment that pertains to them, based on their organizational membership. After all surveys have been completed, organizational unit heads can sign off on the surveys, and when all of the surveys have been completed and signed off, the entire assessment is considered to be complete. These types of workflows are pertinent to organizational and app assessments. We'll see a few other workflows later for vendor assessments as well. Similar to the previous one, this workflow is suited to large organizations. The only difference between this one and the previous one we looked at is who is responsible for entering inventory data into Isora GRC. In very large-scale enterprises, it may not be feasible for administrators to know about all of the inventory that needs to be included in an assessment. This is particularly true where members are allowed to use personal devices. In this workflow, the Isora GRC administrator sends out a reminder to users before the assessment is created, asking them to enter inventory data into Isora GRC. You may have IT staff in each department assigned to do this task, or you could possibly require all users to add their inventory to the tool. The rest of the workflow is the same as before. Administrators create the assessment and push the surveys out to end users who complete and sign them off. This last example workflow is better suited to small-scale environments. In this case, the Isora GRC administrators do everything. For this to work, the admins would have to be very hands-on in their environment to not only be aware of all inventory that needs to be included in assessments, but also to be able to know and verify the answers to all relevant survey questions. Vendor assessments are a little different in that the surveys themselves can be filled out by an external person, someone who does not have to have an Isora GRC user account. Also, you don't have to be a super user to create a vendor assessment. An ordinary Isora GRC end user with the correct permissions can create a vendor assessment. Usually, a link to the survey will be emailed to the vendor for them to fill out, but you could also fill it out yourself in-house. The documentation for Isora GRC is stored online, and there are 3 main guides as well as some auxiliary documentation. For administrators, your biggest source of info would be the Isora GRC Administrator's Guide. Here you'll find step-by-step instructions for initial configuration and details about every aspect of the tool's user interface. There's also a quick start guide for admins that you may find helpful when you're first getting started. Salty Cloud can help you with a lot of the initial configuration as part of the onboarding process. The user's guide is much more limited in scope. It just covers what end users need to know in order to fill out surveys or add inventory using the graphical user interface. And then finally, the Isora GRC API guide is geared toward advanced users, particularly administrators, who want to use the API. Everything that you do on the Isora GRC web GUI can also be done using a REST-like API. In fact, under the covers, the GUI invokes the API. So if you want to get started with the API, in addition to the API guide, you may find your browser is an excellent tool for figuring out how API calls are structured. You would most likely want to use the API for automating activities that involve adding or removing large quantities of data to or from Isora GRC. Currently, all of the Isora GRC online documentation is stored in Confluence, and you can use the link shown here to access the documentation. This URL will stay the same even if the location of the documentation changes in the future. If you have a difficult time accessing the documentation on Confluence, you can also request a PDF of any of the documentation you need from Salty Cloud directly. In order to access the service desk to open a support ticket, you would need to sign up one time for a free account. And from here, you'd be able to report any bugs that you may find or even suggest feature or improvements. If you've already signed up for a proof of concept setup with Isora GRC, you can continue viewing more instructional videos to get more help. The next topics will be about how to access Isora GRC and importing organizational data. If you don't already have a proof of concept, please reach out to info@saltycloud to learn more about how you can have a personalized demonstration of Isora GRC utilizing your own proof of concept installation. This concludes the topic. Welcome to Isora GRC. Thanks so much for joining me.